You've touched on something there that I wanted to explore with you, and that's that the Chinese people now have heard so much from the Chinese Communist Party, so little from outside, and coupled with it, of course, is this unbelievable surveillance machinery that casts real doubt on the old idea that authoritarian regimes, fail because their own people rise up against them. It's almost impossible to break out, I would have thought, in China today, because you're going to be stopped before you get off to base one. The social credit system, you're born with a number of points if you do the wrong thing. It's also incredibly surveilled. I'm told there's 400 million closed circuit television cameras in China alone monitoring people, facial recognition, point system being added up. If it goes wrong, you won't get the internet speeds you need to do your homework. If you misbehave even more, you won't get a job. You won't be allowed to. That sort of control is unheard of. And yet I would have thought it would have stifled. Here's the thing. China's become, going back to my earlier point, one of the things that's picked up from the West is an economic model that's worked well. It's been broadly free enterprise. But this must absolutely stifle innovation and economic growth. I see it's being scaled back a lot because of fears of what Beijing imposed on businesses last year. But how do they maintain that increasing wealth if they treat their people in this sort of way and their businesses in those sorts of anti-free enterprise ways? Economics being vital to military power in the end.
Well, if you look at the way China has attained wealth up till now, up till very recent years, it's largely been the manufacturing power. And when you become a manufacturing country, you can import that innovation. You can import the know-how. And so if you look at the 1990s and 2000s, most of the manufacturing capital, most of it came from advanced democracies, right? So that's how China imported the know-how. So in a sense, you can import that, you can produce things cheaper and better, or cheaper at least, and faster than other countries. And that's what China's done. But this is now a real challenge for China that you're getting to. And China can't now rise further just as a manufacturing country because it's run out of markets to manufacture basic goods for, right? So it has to rise up as an innovation country. It has to create industries in the next areas that will generate value and generate wealth. And this is actually what the Made in China 2025 stuff is all about. Now, to your question, how do they do that? Because you require a lot of innovation for that to occur. To put it very bluntly, China either tries to continue to import it, that is allowing companies like Tesla to come in and allow that technology transfer. It's another reason why China so systematically relies on intellectual property theft, because it has to do that in order to get the innovation inputs into its economy. But the challenge still remains to them. How do they actually produce genuine domestic sources of innovation that aren't just incremental? And they haven't really been able to do that so far. And this is where I think that China has often portrayed itself as an innovation autarky that doesn't need the rest of the world. It's actually it's actually quite the opposite, that China is still extremely reliant on the West, United States and Europe in particular, to continue its rise, but it's trying to sort of get the things it needs from the West without giving up anything in return. And so this is where I think, we still have quite a fair bit of leverage over China if we actually want to use it. Just on a final point about something you raised about the social credit system, that's been very effective because most Chinese people aren't Communist Party followers. But because of things like the social credit system, it conditions the way you actually behave, right? So it's not like they really love Xi Jinping thought, but they have to do what they have to do to get ahead in their society. So they effectively act like good party members, even if they're not ideologically devoted to the party. And that's been a real problem for us. I mean, there's also other things in China like the internet. We thought the internet would be a liberating force for China. The problem is they have the Great Firewall of China, where nothing goes in or out without permission of the Chinese Communist Party. But another problem with the idea of the internet being a liberating force for China is that most people in China speak and read Mandarin. And most Mandarin content is created inside China, which is regulated and censored by the Chinese Communist Party. So they're not really, even if they could get access to the New York Times or the Australian newspaper, they don't read that, right? Because they don't read English. So these are some further barriers as to why China hasn't been as exposed to outside ideas as we would have thought when they first integrated with the global economy.
Despite the contact they must have had with much of the diaspora around the rest of the world, and there was 1.5 million Chinese citizens in this country now, I think. And they're all over the world. Many of them, if they're able to communicate freely with their families back home, must be revealing a very different and more cheerful, if I can put it that way, environment in which to live.
Well, if a lot of the Chinese diasporas that still have contact with people inside mainland China, their contacts tend to be in the middle classes inside mainland China. And the problem with a lot of the attitudes of middle classes inside mainland China, they are the strongest supporters of the Chinese Communist Party. And they are because they're the primary beneficiaries of the Chinese Communist Party and the way the political economy is set up. So if you speak to the middle classes in mainland China, they basically parrot CCP messages because they're the ones that primarily benefit. In fact, it's actually the poorer people in China who don't tend to be as strongly supportive of the CCP. So the CCP is now very much an elite society, but they're the sorts of people that we interact with, or the diasporas tend to interact with. And so they actually tend to be, very strong defenders of the CCP system.
Well, you've given us a lot of insights. To start to try and pull this together a little, to quote a recent article of yours, you say this: China is playing a longer game. It still needs capital, technology, know-how, and access to Western markets to eventually surpass the United States. Does this mean that contrary to so much international relations commentary over the past 15 years, that perhaps China's economic rise to supremacy is not inevitable?
I've spent a big part of the last 10 years trying to make the case that we, the advanced democracies, United States, Australia, we have a lot of agency as to what happens, despite this narrative that is inevitable that China is going to dominate. Now, even if you look at Chinese blueprints like the Belt and Road Initiative and Made in China 2025, these blueprints were produced by the CCP precisely because they realized how vulnerable they are. Even with the Belt and Road Initiative, it needs Western Europe to actually work. With Made in China 2025, it needs continued access to the markets of the advanced democracies, including America, for Made in China 2025 to actually happen. Now, China is still, by a long margin, a net importer of technology and know-how, of innovation. It has structural problems. Its age demographics in about 20 years are going to be like Western Europe's, or in fact 10 years is going to be like Western Europe, without the social systems, the pension systems, health systems to actually support that. It has a enormous debt problem. It has increased its amount of debt in relative and absolute terms by the most of any major economy in world economic history. It basically can't grow anymore using the model that it has. So for China to succeed, it needs to lull the advanced democracies into a sense of false security in order to disproportionately benefit from interactions with us. So what I'm really trying to say is we have a lot of say in what happens to us and also what actually happens to China. And if you want to put it this way, I would rather be Joe Biden than Xi Jinping. I think the Chinese are I don't underestimate them, but the Chinese Communist Party is in a very difficult situation, and it's almost reached the twilight of its most opportunistic years. It's going to get harder from now on.